The unique system of initiation authorized by this directive or letter. The system that Srila Prabhupada authorized and established by this letter is non-traditional. It's totally unique. To understand this issue better, we really need to understand and appreciate just how unique the system is. In my personal story, I've already broken down what the Rtvik representative of the Acharya system is, or what I refer to as the Rtvik Ras, and how Srila Prabhupada had slowly introduced it, step by step, gradually, as a feature of his mission. Rather than repeating all that here, I provide a link to that section. If you haven't watched that yet, please do so by tapping on the link. And if you do tap on the link and you go and watch it, you'll come back where we left off here. And if you don't click on the link, in 3 seconds, I'm going to give a summary review so that if you did watch it before, you don't have to watch it again. If you just want a summary of it, I'm going to give that in just 3 seconds. Originally, when Srila Prabhupada started ISKCON, he made the assessment of his own prospective disciples, as would be traditional for the Diksha Guru to do. Also in the beginning, Srila Prabhupada alone chanted on the beads, the Gayatri threads, he selected the devotional names, and he performed the fire sacrifices. As the mission grew and Srila Prabhupada began traveling constantly, he also began to delegate one aspect, then another. He delegated the responsibility of assessing the new candidates to the temple presidents. He trained devotees like Pradyumna to perform the fire sacrifices. At first, Srila Prabhupada would still be present in the temple room, but soon, however, he would just have the temple presidents also perform the fire sacrifices when Srila Prabhupada wasn't present at that temple. Very early on, the system became that once a devotee met the criteria set by Srila Prabhupada for initiation, the temple president would then send a letter of recommendation to Srila Prabhupada, recommending those devotees. Originally, Srila Prabhupada would chant on the beads or the threads, select the names, and send back a letter accepting the devotees, listing their new names, and enclosing the beads and threads. If Srila Prabhupada was not coming to that temple soon, he would have the temple president, a sannyasi or GBC, perform the fire sacrifices on his behalf. For Gayatri mantra, the Guru is to chant the mantra into the ear of the disciple. As early as 1970, Srila Prabhupada made a recording of himself chanting the Gayatri mantra and instructed that when he is not present at the initiation, that the temple president or GBC can play the recording via headphone into the ear of the new Brahman initiate devotee. Even this aspect of the initiation process, Srila Prabhupada had delegated not only to others, but to an electronic recording and playback of his chanting. Then he began delegating the chanting of the beads, chanting on the beads and the threads to various GBC men, and also even the selection of the spiritual names he delegated now and then. For many years, this was the standard for initiations. His divine grace had delegated many aspects. Sometimes he would chant on the beads, sometimes he would select the names, and sometimes not. Sometimes he would be in the temple when the fire sacrifice was performed, and sometimes not. As Srila Prabhupada delegated more and more of the process, none of the disciples, at least that I've ever heard of, ever questioned whether any of this was bona fide or not. Srila Prabhupada was our spiritual master, and we knew and accepted him as Krishna's pure representative. Whatever Srila Prabhupada did, we understood and accepted he was fully authorized to do so. There was one aspect of the initiation process that Srila Prabhupada had not yet delegated. When the temple presidents wrote their letters of recommendation, those letters were always sent to Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada was the one and only one who would make the final acceptance of those recommendations. This was the only consistent physical aspect of the initiation process that Srila Prabhupada remained involved in directly up until the July 9th directive. In fact, the one unique feature of the July 9th letter is that Srila Prabhupada had now established a system by which he now delegated even this last physical aspect of the initiation process. He created a new post which he called the Rtvik representative of the Acharya, and he authorized those men to accept the recommendations for the new initiates on his behalf. In the past, temple presidents have written to Srila Prabhupada recommending a particular devotee's initiation. Now that Srila Prabhupada has named these representatives, temple presidents would henceforward send the recommendations for first and second initiation to whichever of these 11 representatives are nearest to their temple. Via the July 9th letter, the temple presidents would to no longer send the letters of recommendation to Srila Prabhupada directly. After considering the recommendation, these representatives may accept the devotee as an initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada by giving a spiritual name, or in the case of second initiation, by chanting on the Gayatri thread, just as Srila Prabhupada has done. Previously, only occasionally Srila Prabhupada would delegate the selection of the names, and in the later years he delegated the chanting of the beads more often to another GBC. But in this letter, all these aspects were now delegated henceforward to the Rtvik representative. What this Rtvik directive created was it completed a 100% proxy system of initiation. The entire physical process of initiation had been now delegated to the temple presidents and now these Rtvik representatives of the Acharya. This created a system that no longer engaged or required Srila Prabhupada's physical presence or his physical direct involvement or approval for accepting new disciples. By delegating all the physical aspects of the initiation process, Srila Prabhupada had set up a system of initiation which no longer required his physical participation at all. Temple presidents make the assessment and recommendations. The Rtvik representative accepts the recommendations on Prabhupada's behalf, chants on the beads or the threads, selects the names, and either they or the temple presidents or sannyasis, etc., perform the fire sacrifices. Srila Prabhupada isn't involved at all anymore physically in that process of initiation. No previous Acharya had ever established any sort of system like this before, even while they were still physically present. I want to restate that because that's a very important point. No previous Acharya had ever established any system like this before, even while they were physically present. This was totally unheard of, totally unique, totally non-traditional. Via this system, Srila Prabhupada could be laying ill, even unconscious in his bed in Vrindavan, and yet be accepting disciples anywhere, everywhere, all over the world, without the need for his physical presence or involvement, period, in any way at all. We know of no past Acharya who had authorized such a system, even while they were still present. Take a moment and think about how unparalleled and non-conforming this system was that he had set up. The GBC don't dispute that Srila Prabhupada authorized this complete 100% proxy system of initiation to be performed by Rtvik representatives of the Acharya. The GBC accept this system that he authorized was fully bona fide. Actually, there is only one difference between their views and ours regarding this letter. That single difference is that the GBC argued that this process only applies and can only apply to while Srila Prabhupada was physically present in this world, living in his Vapu, earthly Vapu body. However, in taking that stand, it means that they are saying that Srila Prabhupada's spiritual potency to give spiritual initiation resided in his Vapu form and not his eternal instructions, which is a bogus and deviant philosophy. Whereas the Rtvik Rasa view is that Srila Prabhupada authorized this process for how initiations are to be conducted in the future, particularly, especially for after he was no longer present in his Vapu form, The Rtvik Ras philosophy recognizes that Srila Prabhupada's spiritual potency to give spiritual initiation resides in those eternal instructions. I've addressed this philosophy in my personal stories section, Vapu versus Vani, Empowering Spiritual Initiation. If you haven't watched that yet, please do so now by clicking on the link. Those who claim that this Rtvik representative system was bona fide, but was so only while Srila Prabhupada resided here in his earthly Vapu form, I illustrate how that is a bogus philosophy. It is based on the deviant idea that what empowered the proxy system of initiations, the Rtvik system that Srila Prabhupada had authorized, was his temporary earthly Vapu form. And that as soon as Srila Prabhupada's spirit soul left that temporary body, the temporary Vapu form, the system, the Rtvik system, lost all of its spiritual potency. And I call this the Vapu Vada philosophy, or the philosophy of the Vapu form. And those who support this scripturally devoid idea, I call the Vapu Vadis. The current GBC advocates this bogus Vapu Vada philosophy and have been the main leaders of the Vapu Vadis. Whereas I call the philosophy that teaches that the basis of the Rtvik representative system was empowered and remains empowered by the eternal living Vani of Srila Prabhupada. That I call the Vana Vadi, the Vani Vada, the Vani Vada. And I call those who follow such a philosophy the Vani Vadis. This presentation, of course, presents and upholds Vani Vada philosophy.